The night has a voice, a symphony of whispers, rustling leaves, and the distant howl of something unseen. But some sounds, some stories, cut through the darkness with a chilling clarity. They speak of things best left undisturbed, of shadows that move with a life of their own. Tonight we delve into the heart of such tales, stories whispered not for entertainment but as warnings, tales born from the chilling reality that sometimes the line between our world and the next blurs. These are not mere ghost stories crafted to send shivers down your spine. These are chronicles of the unexplained, the unsettling truths that linger long after the campfire embers fade. Tales born from the lips of those who have stared into the abyss and lived to tell the tale. Prepare yourself, for tonight we venture into the realm where fear takes root. We live our lives cocooned in the mundane, comforted by the illusion of predictability. But this veil of normalcy is thin, easily pierced by the sharp edges of the unknown. And when it tears, we glimpse the terrifying vastness that lies beyond. The stories we share tonight are those glimpses, fragments of terror woven into the fabric of human experience. They are not bound by time or place, for fear is a universal language whispered across cultures and etched into the very DNA of our being. From the haunted corners of ancient homes to the sterile, echoing halls of abandoned asylums, the darkness holds its breath, waiting to exhale its secrets. Each location, a stage for the unspeakable, each tale a testament to the enduring power of fear. The past is never truly gone. It lingers in the shadows, whispering through the cracks of time. And sometimes those whispers take on a life of their own, bleeding into the present with chilling consequences. These stories are echoes of those bygone terrors. Tales whispered from generation to generation, each retelling adding another layer of dread. They remind us that some wounds run deeper than time, their scars etched onto the very soul of a place. Haunted objects, cursed artifacts, places where the veil between life and death wears thin. These are the domains of the restless dead, forever seeking solace or perhaps vengeance. Their stories serve as stark reminders that some transgressions can never be forgiven, some debts never repaid. What lies beyond the veil of death remains one of humanity's greatest mysteries. And while some find solace in the promise of an afterlife, others tremble at the thought of what might await us in the darkness. The stories we are about to explore delve into that unsettling unknown. They speak of encounters with entities that defy explanation, of shadows that move with unnerving purpose. They challenge our understanding of life and death, leaving us questioning the very nature of our reality. These are not tales for the faint of heart. They are raw, visceral accounts of terror that will linger long after the last word is spoken. They are a stark reminder that we are but visitors in a world far older and stranger than we can comprehend. Section 5, The Unsettling Truth. Tonight, we invite you to confront the unsettling truth that some stories are best left untold. But curiosity, as they say, is a powerful force. And so, we gather here in the darkness, drawn together by a shared fascination with the unknown. These stories are not for entertainment. They are warnings, whispered from the shadows, meant to remind us that the world is a far stranger and more terrifying place than we care to admit. Brace yourselves, for the journey ahead is not for the faint of heart. The stories you are about to hear are true, and they are terrifying. In the quiet outskirts of a forgotten town, shrouded by a perpetual mist, stood an imposing Victorian manor. Its once grand facade had long since faded to a sombre grey, the ornate windows now like vacant eyes staring out at the world. It was the kind of house that seemed to hold its breath, a place where shadows lingered a little too long and the air hung heavy with unspoken secrets. The manor had stood empty for decades, its history whispered about in hushed tones by the locals. They spoke of a family torn apart by tragedy, of whispers that seemed to emanate from within the walls themselves, and of a darkness that clung to the house like a shroud. Most avoided the old manor, their unease a palpable thing. But there were always those drawn to the allure of the unknown, those who scoffed at superstition and whispered tales. It was into this brooding silence that the Harringtons unwittingly stepped. The first few weeks in the manor were unsettling yet uneventful. The Harringtons busied themselves with unpacking and planning the renovations, their initial apprehension giving way to cautious optimism. John immersed himself in researching the manor's history, poring over dusty documents and faded photographs found in the attic. Eleanor, with her keen eye for design, began sketching plans to breathe life back into the neglected rooms. Daniel and Sophia, their initial excitement tempered by the sheer size and emptiness of the house, found solace in exploring the vast gardens and the overgrown orchard behind the manor. Yet, as the days turned into weeks, a palpable unease began to settle over the family. It started subtly, like a shift in the atmosphere, a coldness that seeped into their bones despite the summer heat. Doors creaked open seemingly on their own, footsteps echoed in the dead of night, and whispers seemed to emanate from the empty rooms. At first they dismissed these incidents as tricks of the old house, settling their nerves with rational explanations. But as the occurrences grew more frequent and more unsettling, a growing sense of dread began to take root. One evening, while Eleanor was reading in the parlour, she felt a cold spot settle over her. The air grew heavy, and a distinct feeling of being watched washed over her. She glanced up, her heart pounding in her chest, and saw the fleeting shadow of a figure dart past the doorway. Shaken, she dismissed it as a trick of the light, but the incident left her deeply unsettled. That night, as she lay in bed, listening to the wind howling outside the window, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone in the house. Something else shared their new home, something unseen and malevolent, and it was slowly making its presence known. The whispers started subtly at first, barely audible murmurs that seemed to drift on the edge of perception. They were most frequent at night, slithering through the darkness like icy fingers tracing spines. Daniel was the first to mention them, his young mind more attuned to the subtle shifts in the atmosphere. He claimed to hear voices whispering his name from the shadows, beckoning him to follow. At first, John and Eleanor dismissed his claims as nightmares, the product of an overactive imagination fueled by the house's eerie ambience. But soon, the whispers grew bolder, their chilling sibilance reaching even their ears. They seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves, carrying with them a coldness that sent shivers down their spines. The whispers were always just out of reach, impossible to decipher. Yet their intent was chillingly clear. They wanted the Harringtons gone. The shadows, too, grew more pronounced, fleeting glimpses of movement in the periphery, dark shapes that seemed to coalesce in the corners of their vision. John, ever the skeptic, tried to rationalize these events. He attributed the whispers to the house settling or drafts whistling through the old vents. The shadows, he insisted, were merely tricks of the light playing on their nerves. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss, that the house held secrets that were best left undisturbed. Eleanor, her initial apprehension now blossoming into full-blown fear, pleaded with John to leave the manor. She argued that it was affecting the children, that the house held a darkness that was slowly poisoning their lives. But John, his pride wounded and his determination to uncover the truth unwavering, refused to budge. As the paranormal activity intensified, the temperature within the manor began to plummet. It was a bone-chilling cold that seemed to emanate from the very core of the house, defying the warmth of the summer sun. Despite building roaring fires in the fireplaces and keeping the radiators on full blast, the Harringtons couldn't shake off the oppressive chill that clung to them like a second skin. The cold seemed to be most intense in certain areas of the house, particularly the attic and Daniel's bedroom. The air in these spaces would become so frigid that their breath would form thick clouds of condensation, their fingers numbing even through layers of clothing. Eleanor shivered even as she piled on extra blankets at night, her sleep plagued by nightmares of shadowy figures and chilling whispers. John, though still clinging to his skepticism, found it increasingly difficult to ignore the unnatural chill that permeated their home. He attempted to explain it away as faulty insulation or drafts seeping through the old windows, but even he had to admit that the intensity and localized nature of the cold defied any rational explanation. The children, their youthful innocence stripped away by the growing sense of dread within the manor, became withdrawn and fearful. Daniel refused to sleep alone, his nightmares becoming more vivid and terrifying with each passing night. Sophia, once a bubbly and energetic child, now clung to her mother's side, her eyes wide with a terror she could barely comprehend. The Harringtons' once peaceful haven had transformed into a prison of fear, the unnatural cold a constant reminder of the unseen force that held them captive. It was as if the house itself was feeding on their terror, growing stronger with each passing day, its icy grip tightening around their hearts. The escalating cold was just the tip of the iceberg. Unexplained events began to plague the Harringtons. Objects vanished and reappeared in impossible locations. Doors slammed shut with bone-jarring force. Disembodied footsteps echoed through the empty hallways. Eleanor felt a cold breath on the back of her neck. She saw a shadowy figure with burning eyes. The figure vanished, leaving her paralyzed with fear. John found her white as a sheet, eyes wide with terror. She tried to explain, her voice trembling. That night they were startled by a loud crash. John cautiously made his way down the stairs. He found a shattered antique vase on the floor. It had been securely placed on a sturdy table. The incident sent a chill down John's spine. Our next tale takes us from the claustrophobic confines of a haunted house to the sprawling, decaying grounds of Cranbrook Mental Asylum. Abandoned for over half a century, Cranbrook casts a long shadow over the landscape, a chilling monument to forgotten suffering and the enduring power of madness. Locals speak of the asylum in hushed tones, their voices laden with fear and superstition. They say that the restless spirits of former patients still roam the crumbling corridors, their tormented souls unable to find peace even in death. Cranbrook's history is a tapestry of sorrow and despair. Built in the late 1800s, the asylum was intended as a sanctuary for the mentally ill, a place of healing and compassion. However, noble intentions soon gave way to cruel realities. Overcrowding, inadequate resources, and a fundamental misunderstanding of mental illness turned Cranbrook into a place of unspeakable horror. Patients were subjected to barbaric treatments, their minds and bodies broken by a system that sought to control rather than cure. Stories of electroshock therapy, lobotomies and experimental drugs leaked out from behind Cranbrook's imposing walls, painting a grim picture of life within its walls. It is said that the screams of the tormented echoed through the halls, their cries for help drowned out by the indifference of those entrusted with their care. As the years turned into decades, Cranbrook's reputation as a place of suffering grew, and the asylum became synonymous with fear and despair. Even after its closure, the stories lingered, whispered like warnings on the wind. For Cranbrook was not just a place of physical confinement, it was a prison for the mind, a place where sanity went to die. The weight of Cranbrook's grim history pressed down on the group of friends as they cautiously approached the main entrance. Mark, the self-proclaimed skeptic, tried to mask his unease with a nervous laugh. His words hung in the air, a feeble attempt to dispel the palpable tension. Emily, her hand trembling, couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. "Emily, it's creepy, even in broad daylight." David, the unofficial leader, adjusted his backpack and nodded. As they stepped through the rusted iron gates, the air grew heavy. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant cawing of crows. The air inside Cranbrook was stale and heavy, thick with the dust of decades and the lingering scent of decay. The friends, their footsteps echoing eerily, made their way cautiously through the labyrinthine interior. The walls, once cheerful, were now a canvas for peeling paint and disturbing graffiti. They reached a set of double doors, Ward C, Women's Ward. The air here seemed colder, damper, and the silence was broken by a low, mournful drone. David exchanged a nervous glance with Emily. "Ready?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Emily nodded, her heart pounding. As David pushed open the doors, creaks and groans echoed. Ward C was a stark space, lined with rooms, each with a rusted bed frame. The windows allowed only slivers of light, casting long, distorted shadows. The air was thick with a palpable sense of sadness. As they moved deeper, the humming intensified, accompanied by a faint tapping. David cautiously approached the room, the others following. He peered through the cracked glass panel, his breath catching. In the dimly lit room, a rocking chair swayed gently, its motion seemingly impossible. Section 4. Residual Energies. The rocking chair's rhythmic motion, seemingly defying the laws of physics, sent a shiver down Emily's spine. Logic dictated that it was simply an old chair, its movement caused by a draft or uneven flooring. Yet, in the oppressive atmosphere of Ward C, logic seemed to hold little sway. The air crackled with an unseen energy, a palpable sense of something unseen observing their every move. Mark, ever the pragmatist, scoffed at their apprehension. "Mark, it's just a draft, guys, probably a window open somewhere," he said, his voice unnaturally loud in the silence. He stepped forward, intending to prove his point by stopping the rocking chair. However, as he reached out a hand, a cold gust of wind seemed to emanate from the chair, pushing him back with unexpected force. He stumbled, regaining his balance with a gasp of surprise. "Mark, what the—" he stammered, his face pale beneath his beard. The temperature in the room seemed to have plummeted, the air growing heavy and oppressive. The humming sound intensified, vibrating through the floor and up their legs, and the faint scent of lavender, out of place in the sterile environment, wafted through the air. David, his initial skepticism giving way to a growing sense of unease, pulled out his EMF meter, a device designed to detect fluctuations in electromagnetic fields often associated with paranormal activity. The meter, previously silent, sprang to life, its needles swinging wildly as he pointed it towards the rocking chair. "David, guys, this isn't normal," he said, his voice tight with tension. Emily, her camera forgotten in her lap, felt a cold dread creep up her spine. They were not alone in Ward C. Something else was present, something unseen but undeniably real. and it was becoming increasingly clear that whatever it was not pleased by their presence. Section 5. The Doctor's Log. Driven by fear and curiosity, David, Emily and Mark delved into Ward C. They found a small office, its door slightly ajar. The office, once belonging to the head doctor, was a time capsule. David picked up a leather-bound journal embossed with Dr. Henry Davies' case notes. With trembling hands, he opened the journal. The handwriting was elegant, but the words were chilling. David, patient 34. B, female, age 27, admitted for acute melancholia. Emily felt a cold shiver run down her spine. The final entry was chilling. Patient 34. B expired this morning. David closed the journal, his heart pounding. Section 6. A patient's torment. The doctor's log had unveiled a terrifying truth. Patient 34. B had died within the very walls they now stood. The oppressive atmosphere of Ward C, it was as if the remnants of the patient's torment still lingered. Emily felt a pang of sadness for the unknown patient. The photograph depicted a young woman with haunting eyes. Her name was Sarah. Mark, visibly shaken, ran a hand through his hair. "We should get out of here." As they exited, the humming sound returned, louder and more insistent. Section 7. The screams begin. The scratching sound escalated into a blood-curdling shriek, echoing through the desolate halls of Ward C. The sheer terror in that sound, raw and primal, sent chills down their spines and rooted them to the spot. It was a sound that spoke of unimaginable suffering, of a torment that transcended death itself. Emily clapped her hands over her ears, her eyes wide with terror. "Emily, oh my God, what is that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Mark, his face ashen, backed away, bumping into David. "Mark, we need to get out of here now," he urged, his voice tight with panic. David, torn between a primal urge to flee and a strange compulsion to understand the source of the screams, hesitated for a moment too long. As if in response to his hesitation, the temperature plummeted, the air growing heavy and oppressive. The humming sound reached a fever pitch, vibrating through their bones, and the faint scent of lavender intensified, now overpowering and cloying. Suddenly the door at the end of the hallway, the one leading to the room with the rocking chair, flew open with a deafening crash. A gust of icy wind swept through the corridor, extinguishing their flashlight and plunging them into darkness. Section 8. Trapped in the asylum. Panic seized them as they fumbled through the darkness, the screams echoing relentlessly around them. They stumbled blindly through the labyrinthine corridors, each turn seemingly leading them further into the asylum's depths. Doors slammed shut behind them, their heavy thuds echoing like gunshots in the silent halls. Emily tripped over a loose floorboard and fell, her camera clattering to the ground. David reached out and pulled her to her feet. "David, we have to keep moving," he urged. They pressed on, their hands clasped tightly together, and then, through the darkness, they saw it. A figure standing silhouetted against the moonlit window. Section 9. Facing their fears. The figure at the end of the hallway stood bathed in the ethereal glow of moonlight, its features obscured by the shadows. David, Emily and Mark froze, their breath catching in their throats, their eyes wide with terror. The air crackled with an unseen energy, a palpable sense of menace that seemed to emanate from the figure like a physical force. "David, who's there?" he called out, his voice trembling slightly, the sound echoing hollowly in the silent hallway. The figure remained motionless, its silence more terrifying than any scream. Emily, her heart pounding against her ribs, gripped David's hand tighter. "Emily?" "Let's just go," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please, let's just get out of here." Mark, his usual bravado completely gone, nodded frantically in agreement. "Mark, this is bad. This is really bad," he muttered under his breath. But David, though equally terrified, felt a strange compulsion to confront their unseen tormentor. He took a hesitant step forward, then another, pulling Emily and Mark along with him. As they drew closer, the figure remained eerily still, its silence amplifying the sense of dread that hung heavy in the air. The humming sound, which had been a constant presence since they entered Ward C, intensified, vibrating through their bones, seeming to resonate with a growing power. And then, slowly, deliberately, the figure turned towards them. The moonlight caught its face, revealing features that sent a fresh wave of terror surging through them. It was the woman from the photograph, Sarah, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes burning with an unnatural light. Sarah's face, contorted in a silent scream, was a horrifying blend of sorrow, anger, and a desperate longing for peace. Her eyes, burning with an eerie luminescence, locked onto David's, and he felt a jolt of pure terror course through him, a primal fear that seemed to bypass his conscious mind and grip him at his very core. The humming sound reached a deafening crescendo, vibrating through the very air around them, seeming to warp and distort reality itself. The temperature plummeted, the air growing thick and icy cold. Emily cried out, burying her face against David's chest, but her scream was swallowed by the oppressive atmosphere. Mark, his face ashen, stumbled back, his eyes wide with terror. "We're trapped," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "We're never going to get out of here." He was right. The asylum, once a place of confinement for the living, had become a prison for them, its walls closing in, its darkness suffocating. Sarah, her form flickering in the shifting shadows, took a step towards them, then another. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as if she were savouring their terror, drawing strength from their fear. David, his rational mind screaming at him to run, felt a strange sense of inevitability settle over him. They were caught in the grip of something ancient and powerful, something that defied explanation or reason. And as Sarah's spectral form reached out towards them, her touch promising not violence, but an eternity trapped within the asylum's walls, David knew, with chilling certainty, that they were not going to escape from Cranbrook unscathed. Our next tale takes us to the cluttered aisles of an antique shop nestled on a quiet side street in London. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight, illuminating a treasure trove of forgotten objects and whispered histories. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax and old paper. It was the kind of shop that drew in the curious and the nostalgic. The shop's proprietor, a stooped figure with watchful eyes, stood behind a glass-topped counter. He had owned the shop for as long as anyone could remember. Some whispered that he could sense the histories embedded within the objects. Others claimed he sought out cursed objects, drawn to their dark allure. Whatever the truth, the old man guarded his shop and its secrets with vigilance. Edward Sterling, a man of wealth, privilege, and an insatiable hunger for rare and unusual artifacts, stepped into the antique shop, his gaze sweeping over the cluttered interior with a practiced eye. A collector of the macabre and the arcane, Edward prided himself on his discerning taste and his willingness to acquire objects that others dismissed as dangerous or cursed. He saw such labels not as warnings but as challenges, invitations to possess and control forces beyond the comprehension of ordinary men. His gaze fell upon the obsidian amulet, the black stone seeming to draw him in like a moth to a flame. He approached the display case, his breath catching in his throat as he felt a strange energy emanating from the amulet, a cold, tingling sensation that spread up his arm as he reached out to touch the glass. "That one," he said, his voice low and husky, addressing the shopkeeper for the first time. "The amulet. Tell me about it." The old man, his eyes narrowed, regarded Edward with a mixture of suspicion and a grudging respect. He had sensed something different about this customer, a darkness that mirrored the shadows lurking within his own heart. "You have a keen eye, sir," he rasped, his voice barely audible above the ticking of an antique grandfather clock in the corner. "But that one is not for sale." Edward, his interest piqued, smiled thinly. He was accustomed to getting what he wanted, and the shopkeeper's resistance only fueled his desire to possess the amulet. "Everything has a price, old man," he said, his voice taking on a steely edge. Section 3. The Shadow of the Amulet. Edward, ignoring the shopkeeper's warning, paid a king's ransom for the obsidian amulet, his heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and a strange, unsettling anticipation. He held the amulet in the palm of his hand, the smooth, cold stone seeming to pulse with a life of its own. The intricate carvings, illuminated by the dim light of his study, seemed to writhe and shift, whispering of forgotten powers and ancient pacts. As the days turned into weeks, Edward became consumed by the amulet, his fascination growing into an obsession that bordered on madness. He spent hours poring over ancient texts, his study littered with crumbling volumes on demonology, ancient languages, and forbidden rituals. He was convinced that the amulet was a key, a conduit to a realm of power and knowledge that lay hidden from the eyes of ordinary men. He began to wear the amulet constantly, the cold weight of the obsidian against his chest, a constant reminder of the forces he believed he was on the verge of controlling. He dismissed the strange occurrences that began to plague him, nightmares filled with whispering voices and shadowy figures, a persistent sense of being watched, a growing coldness that seemed to emanate from the amulet itself, as mere side effects of his intense research. But as the lines between obsession and reality blurred, Edward began to change. His jovial nature turned withdrawn and secretive. His once warm brown eyes took on a cold, calculating glint. He pushed away his friends and family, his only companions, the ancient texts, and the whispering promises of the amulet. He was no longer content with merely possessing the artifact. He craved to unlock its secrets, to tap into the power he believed it held, even if it cost him his soul. Edward found himself on a windswept plain, the sky above a swirling vortex of black clouds. A solitary figure approached, shrouded in shadow. Edward felt a cold dread grip his heart. The figure stopped before him, its features obscured by darkness. A voice echoed in Edward's mind. "You have meddled with forces beyond your comprehension. The amulet is a curse, not a gift. It will consume you, body and soul." Edward tried to speak, but his voice died in his throat. Paralyzed by fear, he was rooted to the spot as the figure reached out a hand. He woke with a gasp, heart pounding, the amulet a terrifying reminder of the dream's reality. He tried to dismiss it as stress, but the dream lingered, casting a long shadow over his waking hours. The whispering voice echoed in his mind. He tried to remove the amulet, but it was as if the obsidian had become a part of him. He was trapped, and as the days turned into weeks, the whispers grew louder, the shadows darker. The first victim of the amulet's curse was Edward's oldest friend, William Hawthorne. William had always been wary of Edward's fascination with the occult. He pleaded with Edward to relinquish the amulet. One evening, as William visited Edward, tragedy struck. William clutched his chest, gasping for help, and collapsed. Edward rushed to his side, but it was too late. The doctor could find no explanation for William's sudden death. Guilt tore through Edward as he stood over William's grave. Our next tale takes us from the dimly lit studies of obsession to the desolate expanse of Route 66, a ribbon of asphalt winding its way through the heart of America. This iconic highway, once a symbol of freedom and adventure, holds its own share of darkness, particularly along the stretches where the neon lights of roadside diners fade into the rearview mirror, and the only companions are the whispering wind and the watchful eyes of coyotes. It is here, on a moonless night, that our story begins. The air is thick with the smell of dust and distant rain, the silence broken only by the low rumble of a vintage Mustang's engine as it eats up the miles. Behind the wheel sits Jack Thompson, a young photographer drawn to the desolate beauty of the American Southwest. He's on a road trip, chasing the ghosts of Route 66's glory days, his camera his only companion. Jack is a man of simple tastes and a restless spirit. He finds solace in the solitude of the open road, in the ever-changing landscape that unfolds before him like a forgotten dream. He's not one for ghost stories, for tales of the supernatural. He believes in what he can see, what he can capture through his lens, the raw beauty of the natural world, the fleeting moments of human connection that illuminate the vast canvas of life. But tonight, as he drives deeper into the heart of the desert, a sense of unease settles over him. The shadows seem to lengthen, stretching out from the roadside like grasping claws. The wind, picking up speed, whispers through the canyons, carrying with it a chill that has nothing to do with the desert night. And in the distance, a pair of headlights appears on the horizon, growing steadily brighter, approaching at an unnatural speed. Jack, his grip tightening on the steering wheel, watched as the approaching vehicle drew closer. It was a beat-up pickup truck, its headlights casting long, distorted shadows that danced across the asphalt. As it roared past, its horn blaring in a long, mournful blast, Jack caught a fleeting glimpse of the driver. A hulking figure shrouded in darkness, its face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. The encounter, though brief, left Jack with a knot of unease in his stomach. He dismissed it as just another strange encounter on a lonely highway, but the image of the driver's shadowed face lingered in his mind, a fleeting image of something menacing and unknown. He pressed on, pushing his Mustang harder, eager to reach the next town, the promise of a warm meal and a soft bed a welcome distraction. But as the miles ticked by, the sense of unease only intensified. The wind continued to howl, its whispers growing louder, more insistent, as if trying to warn him of something he couldn't quite grasp. The shadows seemed to deepen, swallowing the landscape in an all-encompassing darkness that pressed against the windows of his car like a suffocating blanket. He reached for the radio, hoping to find a burst of static, a fragment of a song, anything to break the oppressive silence. But the dial spun uselessly, the only sound a low, mournful hum that seemed to emanate from the very depths of the car itself. He was alone, truly alone, in a vast and unforgiving landscape, the only signs of civilization fading into the rearview mirror. And as he rounded a bend in the road, his headlights illuminated a figure standing by the side of the highway, its thumb extended in the universal sign of a hitchhiker seeking a ride. The figure stood motionless by the side of the road, bathed in the harsh glare of Jack's headlights. It was a young woman, her long, dark hair whipping in the wind, her clothes torn and dusty. She clutched a battered suitcase, her other hand outstretched, her thumb still raised in a silent plea for help. Jack, a wave of compassion washing over him, slowed the Mustang to a stop. He was wary, of course. He knew the dangers of picking up strangers on a lonely highway, particularly at night, but there was something about the woman's stance, the desperation in her silhouette, that tugged at his heartstrings. He rolled down the window, the wind instantly whipping into the car, carrying with it the scent of dust and sagebrush. "You okay?" he called out, his voice barely audible above the howl of the wind. The woman hesitated for a moment, her head tilted slightly as if listening to something he couldn't hear. Then, slowly, she turned towards him. The light from his headlights caught her face, and Jack gasped, his blood turning to ice in his veins. Her features, though young, were drawn and pale, her eyes hollow and dark, but it was her smile, a grotesque, unnatural stretching of her lips that revealed teeth that were too sharp, too long, that sent a shiver down his spine. He slammed his foot on the accelerator, the Mustang roaring forward, leaving the woman standing in a cloud of dust and fading light. He risked a glance in the rearview mirror, his heart pounding against his ribs, expecting to see the woman still standing there, her smile widening, her eyes burning with an infernal light. But the road behind him was empty, the woman gone as if she had never been there at all. Jack, his heart still racing, tried to rationalize what he had seen. He told himself it was a trick of the light, a hallucination brought on by fatigue and the oppressive atmosphere of the desert night. But deep down a primal fear whispered that he had witnessed something truly unsettling, something that defied explanation. He rolled up the window, the silence inside the Mustang now deafening in the wake of the howling wind. He turned on the radio again, this time desperate for any sound, any distraction from the image of the woman's face that was seared into his mind. Static crackled through the speakers, followed by a burst of music. A mournful melody, a woman singing in a language he couldn't understand. He tried to change the station, but the dial wouldn't budge. The song continued, its haunting melody weaving its way into his thoughts, amplifying the sense of unease that had settled over him like a shroud. The wind picked up again, now a symphony of whispers and moans that seemed to emanate from all directions at once. He could have sworn he heard his name being called. A faint whisper carried on the breeze, a chillingly familiar voice that sent shivers down his spine. He glanced nervously at the passenger seat, half expecting to see the woman from the roadside sitting beside him, her spectral form shimmering in the dim light of the dashboard. But the seat was empty. The only passenger his growing fear, and the haunting melody that seemed to follow him, echoing in his mind even when he finally managed to turn off the radio. He was being followed, hunted, by something he couldn't see, something that whispered on the wind and haunted the desolate stretches of Route 66. The next hour passed in a blur of adrenaline and fear. Jack drove with a desperation he had never known, pushing his Mustang to its limits. He rounded a bend, his headlights cutting through the darkness, and slammed on the brakes. Standing in the middle of the road was the figure of a man. He was tall and gaunt, his clothes tattered and torn. Jack's heart pounded in his chest. He cautiously stepped out of the car, the wind whipping at his clothes. "Hello," he called out, his voice a trembling whisper. The figure remained motionless, its silence more unnerving than any scream. The moonlight caught its face and Jack's blood ran cold. Our final tale takes us deep into the heart of Black Ridge Forest. A sprawling woodland steeped in shadow and unsettling local lore. Towering pines, ancient and gnarled, claw at the sky, their branches intertwining to form a canopy so dense that sunlight struggles to penetrate. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The silence broken only by the chirping of unseen insects and the distant cawing of crows. Black Ridge has long been a place of mystery and whispered tales. Locals speak of strange lights seen flickering amongst the trees at night, of disembodied whispers carried on the wind, and of those who venture too deep into the forest's embrace and are never seen again. Some dismiss these stories as mere folklore, the product of overactive imaginations and the forest's inherently eerie atmosphere. But others, those who know the woods best, speak of an ancient presence that dwells within its shadowy depths, a malevolent entity that preys on the lost and the unwary. They say that the forest itself is a living, breathing thing, its roots reaching deep into the earth, its branches stretching out like grasping claws, eager to claim those who dare to trespass on its domain. It is into this unsettling landscape that our story takes us, to a group of friends, their backpacks laden with supplies and their hearts filled with a mixture of anticipation and unease as they embark on a weekend camping trip, eager to escape the confines of the city and reconnect with nature. They are young, full of life, and oblivious to the darkness that awaits them beneath the whispering pines of Black Ridge Forest. The late afternoon sun cast long, distorted shadows as the group of friends made their way deeper into the forest. Their laughter echoed through the trees, a fleeting counterpoint to the oppressive silence that seemed to press in from all sides. There were 4 of them: Daniel, the unofficial leader of the group, his compass and map clutched tightly in his hand; Emily, her camera snapping away, eager to capture the beauty of the ancient woodland; Chris, his eyes scanning the undergrowth, his hand resting on the hunting knife strapped to his belt; and Jessica, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, her gaze flitting nervously from shadow to shadow. "Jessica, are we lost, Daniel?" Jessica asked, her voice barely a whisper above the crunching of leaves beneath their boots. "Jessica, I thought you said this trail led to the lake." Daniel, consulting his map again, frowned. Chris, his eyes narrowed, scanned the trees around them. "Chris, relax, Jess. It's a big forest, that's all. We'll find our way." Emily, lowering her camera, nodded in agreement. "Emily, yeah, stop worrying. It's all part of the adventure, right?" But as the shadows lengthened and the forest seemed to close in around them, the weight of their isolation settled over the group like a shroud. The laughter faded, replaced by a tense silence, broken only by the sound of their own breathing and the distant hammering of a woodpecker. And in the air, carried on the faintest whisper of wind, a sense of unease, of something watching, something waiting, began to grow. As dusk began to settle over the forest, casting the trees in an eerie, otherworldly light, Daniel called a halt to their hike. "Daniel, we're not going to find the lake tonight. Let's set up camp here for the night, and we'll figure out where we went wrong in the morning." The others, relieved to stop moving, readily agreed. Chris gathered firewood, his movements quick and efficient, his eyes constantly scanning the surrounding woods. Emily, her camera now tucked safely away, helped Jessica unpack their supplies, their earlier anxieties momentarily forgotten in the task at hand. Daniel, consulting his map one last time, shook his head in frustration. "This doesn't make sense. We should have reached the lake hours ago." As he folded the map, his gaze fell upon a faded notice pinned to a nearby tree. It was a missing persons poster, its edges tattered and bleached by the sun. The picture showed a young man, his face frozen in a smile, his eyes bright and hopeful. The caption read, "Have you seen this man? Michael Evans, last seen hiking in Blackridge Forest 2 weeks ago. If you have any information, please contact." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine as he read the words, the image of the missing hiker's smiling face burning its way into his mind. He tore down the poster, crumpling it in his fist. "Emily, what is it?" Emily asked, noticing his sudden change in demeanour. Daniel hesitated for a moment, then showed her the poster. "Just a weird feeling. Let's just hope he found his way out of the woods." But even as he spoke the words, a knot of unease tightened in his stomach. The forest, once a place of beauty and tranquility, now seemed to throb with a hidden menace, its shadows whispering of secrets best left undisturbed. The night descended upon the forest like a suffocating blanket, the darkness absolute, broken only by the flickering flames of their campfire. The wind, picking up speed, howled through the trees, its whispers taking on the shape of words, of warnings, in the minds of the 4 friends huddled around the fire. They had eaten their meagre dinner in silence, their earlier anxieties replaced by a growing sense of dread that settled over them like the oppressive humidity of the forest air. "Jessica, maybe we should try to signal for help. Someone must be looking for that hiker, right?" Chris, feeding another log onto the fire, shook his head. "Chris, no cell service out here, remember? And even if there was, who knows if we're even close enough to civilization for anyone to pick it up?" Emily, her gaze fixed on the flames, shivered. "Emily!" "Stop it, you guys, you're freaking me out." Daniel, his hand resting on the hunting knife he had taken from Chris, nodded in agreement. "Daniel, she's right. I'm going to check the perimeter. Make sure everything's secure." He stood up, stretching his legs, his gaze scanning the perimeter of their campsite. He grabbed his flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating the gnarled trunks of trees and the tangled undergrowth that surrounded their campsite. As he walked, he noticed something strange. The trail they had been following, though faint to begin with, seemed to simply end, swallowed by the undergrowth as if it had never been there at all. He shone his flashlight in all directions, but there was no sign of the path, no indication of which way they had come or where they should go. It was as if the forest itself had erased their tracks, cutting them off from the world outside its shadowy embrace. And so, we come to the end of our journey into the heart of darkness. The stories we've explored tonight, drawn from the annals of human experience, stand as chilling reminders that the world is a far stranger and more terrifying place than we often care to admit. The shadows we've glimpsed, the whispers we've overheard, linger in the mind, their edges blurring the lines between reality and nightmare. As the silence descends, we are left to confront the unsettling truths that these tales reveal. The old Victorian manor, the abandoned asylum, the cursed amulet, the lonely highway, the whispering woods, each location a testament to the enduring power of fear. A stage where the veil between our world and the unseen grows thin. These are not mere ghost stories crafted to entertain or to frighten. They are echoes of something ancient and primal, a darkness that has haunted humanity since the dawn of time, a reminder that we are but temporary residents in a world far older and stranger than we can comprehend. And as you prepare to turn off your screens, to step back into the comforting illusion of normalcy, remember this. The darkness is always listening. It waits patiently in the shadows, its secrets whispering on the wind, its presence felt in the stillness between heartbeats. The rational mind seeks explanations, logical reasons for the unexplainable. We crave order, predictability, a world where the laws of physics hold sway and the supernatural remains safely confined to the realm of fiction. But the stories we've explored tonight defy such easy categorization. The rocking chair swaying in the abandoned asylum, the vanishing hitchhiker on the lonely highway, the trail that disappears into the heart of the whispering woods, these are not mere anomalies, easily dismissed as tricks of the light or figments of overactive imaginations. They are glimpses into a realm beyond our understanding, where the impossible becomes possible and the boundaries of reality itself begin to fray. The human mind, for all its complexity and ingenuity, is ill-equipped to process such experiences. We cling to logic, to reason, even in the face of the unexplainable. We seek patterns, connections, anything to make sense of the chaos. But sometimes the only truth lies in accepting that some things defy explanation, that some mysteries are best left unsolved. For to stare too long into the abyss is to risk being consumed by it, to lose oneself in the labyrinthine corridors of the unknown. Belief is a powerful force, capable of shaping our perceptions, our experiences, our very realities. What we believe or refuse to believe can determine how we interpret the world around us, how we react to the unknown. The stories we've explored tonight tap into this primal power of belief, forcing us to confront the limits of our own understanding. Do we dismiss the whispers in the old Victorian manor as mere drafts, the product of an aging structure? Or do we allow ourselves to entertain the possibility that something unseen walks beside us in the darkness? Do we rationalize the chilling encounters on Route 66 as hallucinations, the result of fatigue and isolation? Or do we accept that some roads lead to destinations best left unvisited? The answers to these questions lie not in the stories themselves, but within each of us. For belief is a choice, a leap of faith into the unknown. It is a willingness to embrace the possibility that our world is far more complex, far more terrifying than we ever imagined. And sometimes the most frightening truth is not the existence of monsters, but the realization that the monsters have always been real, lurking just beyond the edges of our perception, waiting for the moment when our disbelief falters and the shadows of doubt creep in. Section 4. The Darkness Within. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of these true terrifying stories is not the external threats they depict, but the darkness they reveal within ourselves. For it is in the face of fear that our true nature is tested, our carefully constructed facade stripped away, revealing the primal instincts that lie beneath. The Harringtons, their idyllic life shattered by the horrors that unfold within the walls of the Victorian manor, are forced to confront their own vulnerabilities, the fragility of their carefully constructed reality. Edward Sterling, consumed by his obsession with the obsidian amulet, becomes a prisoner of his own ambition, his thirst for power blinding him to the darkness that festers within his own heart. And Jack Thompson, the skeptical photographer, is stripped bare by the terrifying encounters on Route 66. His belief in the rational world shattered by the realization that some forces defy explanation. Some truths cannot be captured through the lens of a camera. These stories remind us that the darkness we fear is not always something external, something that lurks in the shadows waiting to claim us. Sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones we carry within ourselves. The shadows that whisper in the backs of our minds. The fears that take root in our hearts and threaten to consume us from within. Section 5. The Unseen World. The world is a tapestry woven from threads of light and darkness, of beauty and terror, of the known and the unknown. The stories we've explored tonight serve as a reminder that there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in our philosophies. That beyond the veil of our everyday perceptions lies a realm of mystery and wonder, of awe and terror. We may never fully understand the forces at play in the universe, the unseen hands that shape our destinies, the whispers that echo from the void. But perhaps that is as it should be. For in the face of the unknown, we are reminded of our own humanity, our own fragility, our own capacity for both great love and unimaginable darkness. These stories challenge us to expand our perceptions, to question our assumptions, to embrace the possibility that the world is far more complex, far more wondrous, and yes, far more terrifying than we ever dared to imagine. They remind us that there are forces at play beyond our comprehension, mysteries that may never be solved, and that sometimes the only appropriate response to the unknown is a sense of awe and a healthy dose of fear. Section 6. A final warning. As we conclude this journey into the heart of darkness, a final word of caution. The stories we've explored tonight are not for the faint of heart. They are tales of true terror, meant to challenge our perceptions, to unsettle our souls, to remind us that the world is not always a safe and predictable place. If you are easily frightened, if you prefer to keep the shadows at bay, then heed this warning. Let these stories serve as cautionary tales, reminders to tread carefully in the darkness, to respect the power of the unknown, and to cherish the fragile flame of reason that illuminates our path through the shadows. For the world is full of wonders, both beautiful and terrifying. And sometimes the wisest course of action is to simply acknowledge the darkness, to respect its power, and to turn away while we still can. Section 7. Sleepless Nights. But if, like me, you find a certain allure in the darkness, a fascination with the mysteries that lie beyond the veil of the everyday, then let these stories serve as a gateway, an invitation to explore the hidden corners of our world and the shadowy recesses of your own imagination. Just be warned. Once you've glimpsed the darkness, it never truly leaves you. It lingers in the back of your mind, whispering its secrets in the stillness of the night, casting long shadows in the flickering light of a candle. You may find yourself questioning the shadows at the edge of your vision, listening a little too closely to the creaks and groans of your own home, wondering what lurks beyond the reach of the streetlights. Sleepless nights may become your new companions, haunted by the echoes of these true terrifying stories. Your dreams a tapestry woven from the threads of fear and fascination that bind us all to the darkness. And in those quiet, unsettling moments, when the line between reality and nightmare blurs, you will know with chilling certainty that you are not alone. For the darkness is always listening, and sometimes it whispers back.